We're in Hebrews 10. If you guys want to jump over to there, I'm sorry, I said 10, but we're actually not in Hebrews 10. We're in Hebrews 11. We finished Hebrews 10 last week, and we were kind of wrapping up in this whole encouragement that the author is doing, where he's like, keep going with the faith, stand strong in it, don't leave Jesus, be with him. And then we're gonna he's leading us into this chapter 11, which is a very famous chapter. And so I suspect it might take us a while to get through it, but we'll see. And so we're gonna go through chapter 11. And so we're starting it, and I'll be honest, I'm looking through my notes, and right right now, as I look through my notes, I have a super long introduction to chapter 11, and it may be too much, and I might have to just ditch it partway through it because I don't want to hear myself talk too much. But we'll see how it goes. But we're gonna start here in chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a very famous chapter. He's going to talk about faith. He's going to give a whole bunch of examples. Some people call this the Hall of Faith. There's all of this stuff. And so we're going to start with verse 1. And actually let's read verse 1 through 3, and then we'll talk about it some and see how that goes. Let's see. Dad, would you mind reading verses 1 through 3? There's no names in this one, but I'll make sure to save the ones with the hard names for you later.
You're wearing that out, John. Okay, Hebrews chapter 1. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it elders obtained a good report. Through faith, we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear.
Right. So we're going to start in verse 1. And before we start, I just want to point, we're going to talk about faith. So we need to actually kind of come around and make sure that we're all on the same page with this word of faith. I'll be honest, and this is going to sound crazy and may upset some of you. This chapter 11, verse 1, I think it's my least favorite verse of the Bible. And you guys might be, what? And let me explain this. But I've had multiple conversations, and I don't actually know how many. It's been a lot, where I'll be talking with someone and we'll start talking about faith. And I'm like, okay, we need to get on the same page. What are we talking about? Faith means a lot of different things. What do you mean by faith? And I don't even know how many times that I've asked the question, what do you mean by faith? And then they quote this verse to me. And it's like, okay, I just gave you the biblical definition of faith. We're done. We can move forward. We're all on the same page. And I'm like, no, we're not on the same page here. I know what the verse means. I know what the verse says. What does that mean to you? You've got to explain to me what you mean by faith. And then often that's actually the end of the conversation, because it's like, if you can't get on board with what the Bible says about faith, then how can we have this conversation? I'm like, explain to me what you think this means, because that's and so that I'm just bringing this up, that a lot of times I've heard this as the definition of faith, and it as itself, it's a great verse, but we just have to be clear and understand that there's actually multiple definitions of the word faith, and they're all valid definitions of the word faith. That's how we use that word, but we use it in context. We can use it to mean a lot of different things. And because of that, when we are talking to other people about faith, it has happened multiple times, and I'm sure it's happened with you, or you've seen it happen, that you can be talking past the person, and that person is talking right past you because you're using the same word, but you're using it in a different meaning. And so you think you're on the same page, but you're really not. And so that's why I want to bring this up, this word about faith. Before we get started, I want to make sure we're all on the same page of what the word faith means. If you were to look it up in the dictionary, and I'm sure it depends on the dictionary, but I just went to the website dictionary.com. If you look up the word faith, there's 8 different meanings for that word faith. And some of them are drastically different. Some of them are similar, but some of them are pretty different. And so that's why I wanna just take a moment to make sure that we're all here. We're all understanding what faith means. And so in the context of putting your faith in Jesus, what do you guys think that means? What is faith in Jesus?
Faith is the foundation. If you wanted to take that word, faith is the substance of things hoped for, and you knock out substance and you put foundation, I think it makes a little more sense. I think it makes a little
Oh, okay.
better whole.
So hold on one second, Dad. Let's
Okay.
not talk about this verse at the moment because I feel like there's some good aspects of the verse that we do want to talk about, but I'm afraid that it's some of the language is just not clear enough for all of us to be on the same page. So that's why that's why I'm asking what it means. So you're saying faith means foundation.
Faith
What do
is
you mean
my
by
foundation.
foundation? What's that?
Faith is my foundation. Faith in Christ. Faith that Christ rose from the dead. That is the foundation that I stand on.
Hmm. So if I'm
Silence is
playing
deafening. You need answers.
if I'm yeah,
The
if
thing is, we can't use faith to describe faith.
Well, no,
that's right. That's right.
trust,
So
trust
for
and
me-
confidence.
For me, what
Okay.
faith is the belief in something that this is just a generic belief in something that you cannot substantiate. You cannot see or abide in or whatever. It's faith in that this is true. That's what faith is.
Okay. Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
I'd second that. I'd say trust and confidence that either someone or something is true.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you just
And
said,
just-
John, is this little different than what Sean said. But go
Well,
ahead, Eric.
No, we're just kind of trying to fill it in, right? And I've heard it all. Believing and trusting in something. There's an object to it.
I think on top
And
of that,
it's all been said. But I think that is. I don't think actually unseen is part of faith. But I get it. Jesus said it. You can have faith in people. You can have faith in yourself. You can have faith in Mother Nature or the tree in front of you or the idol that we make with our hands. Where do you place? I mean, if you're placing your trust in something, you believe in it. It's given.
Okay, so you're saying faith is trust
Oh.
in something, and it can be all of these different things.
I
Okay,
would
gotcha.
say it's a combination. Not only do I trust it, but I believe it to be true so much that I'm going to conduct myself in this way
Okay, all
or in
right.
a certain way,
All right.
if that makes sense.
Okay.
I think that's probably why the translators use substance. It's a number of things. That's not
Yeah.
so simply a belief or a trust. I think a lot of that is that's why I mean, I know you'll go back to the verse later, but yeah, I agree. If you're gonna force me to use different words, it would be a combination of a number of things that includes belief, trust, and somewhat of a certainty. I guess suppose that's trust. You know, the reason you trust something and you act on it is because there's a belief that there's something that could happen, or because you entrust to a particular person or a thing, the outcome that you're expecting is tied to that, I suppose. Right. If I put my money in the bank, I have faith, although unreasonable faith these days, that it's
I thought you said bunny in the bank. Excuse me.
Bunnies reproduce too.
But anyhow, you know where I'm going. I mean,
Fiduciary.
there's a belief in trust, but there's an expectation tied to that. It's not just
Yeah.
just I believe, although it could be simply that sometimes for some people. I see it a little bit stronger, at least.
Yeah. Okay. So, oh, go ahead, Sean. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I want to retract that. What I said, I agree with what Eric says. It doesn't have to be unseen. It can be in anything, because we have faith that we're sitting in a chair that's not going to fall apart. I mean, we
Yeah.
have faith in objects too. And just as Rich was saying, we have faith in other men or other institutions. If we put our money or our bunnies in the bank, you never know.
Is that really faith then? If we can tangibly see it, touch it, interact with it? Because
If the chair
the
fails,
definition,
then the faith
But-
has failed.
but and I'm just kind of pushing back just a little for fun
Sure.
here, but is that really faith? If you
Yeah.
can tangibly touch something or feel it, because that's I think that transcends faith. It's an expectation of performance. It's an expectation of tangibility.
So
Oh,
I like
but if you have money in your hand, you then have to ask yourself, what does money mean?
So that's a really good question. Money, and now I'm going to go off on a tangent. Money is the expectation of what it can do. It's the barter. It's the barter tool that honest men use to make business transactions.
Yeah.
So you could actually say that money is a tangible aspect, but we have faith in what it can actually do, because we can't see what it actually does. It's that faith that we have that it can do something for us in a tangible realm.
So let me push back on your pushback a little bit, Tim.
Okay,
Because
this is
I
just
like
fun
this.
for
This
me.
is this is great. No, this is great. And afterwards, I should actually read you some of the definitions of faith, because technically we are all using the word faith correctly. It's just it has so many different meanings and this is the problem with this particular word. And this is why we can sometimes talk past each other. And I want to make sure we're all on the same page. But let me just push back a little bit and say, flying in an airplane, okay? There are three types of people when it comes to flying on an airplane. There are people who have no faith in flying that an airplane will keep them up, and they absolutely will not fly in a plane. And there's a famous guy, he's not alive anymore, but his name is John Madden, and he would travel the country and he would not get on a plane. He used a motorhome to get wherever he wanted to go. And then there's the people who have a little bit of faith on that airplane. And what they're going to do is they're going to take drugs and alcohol to get them over that hump. And they're still going to get on the plane, but they just barely have enough faith that plane's going to keep them in the sky. And then you have the third group of people who have enough faith where it's not even an issue. They're going to go on the plane. They're not going to even think about it. They're just going to go fly in that plane. And their faith is in that plane, or it's not in that plane. The plane can be seen. It's tangible. You can touch it. You can go through the science of how it all works. You can look at all of the evidence and stories that say that it will keep you safe. But there are people who still aren't going to have faith in that thing, even with all of that. And then on top of that, although that is your faith that airplane is going to keep you in the sky, it's not guaranteed, right? There are going to be examples where you can get on a plane and you're not going to survive. And it could be for a lot of reasons. There could be freak accidents. You could have a heart attack. There could be all of these other things that happen. But the plane is just the plane. And that's I think that's the point of it, is the faith is in how much you're going to trust in that thing, regardless of the actual abilities of that thing. I don't know.
I bring this up in the fact that also I agree with you, because you know those white plastic molded chairs that are stackable? I have no faith in those, because me being a big guy, I have sat on many of them that have sat out in the sun too long, and they have collapsed on me or whatever. So I have no faith in those, and that is the word faith. Is what I use.
Well,
There's an interesting,
you're bringing up there's levels of faith.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a little
And-
bit, but I'm just using that as an example for what Tim brought
Yeah,
up.
so I can see the like faith is you have to make a bet. That means it have to cost you something if what you believe is false. So if what you believe is false, it doesn't cost you anything. The faith is not really faith, right? So like your airplane example and your seat example, they are all like, if what you believe is wrong, you are going to suffer from it.
yeah,
But faith doesn't talk about whether or not that thing is right or wrong. It's just talking about if you put your trust or confidence in that thing.
And I think that we don't know, right? We all believe what we believe. This is the definition of it. But I think it's whatever that you need to put some skin on it. This is what I want to say.
Sure.
so I guess, I think these are just, it's good stuff. I'm glad that Christianese is not sufficient for you. Man after my own heart and men after my own heart, or God's heart, sorry. But you're really it is kind of, we can go on a lot in saying that there is meaning inherent in things. There's purpose inherent in things, and there's a desire that we put into these things. Those things surround it. When somebody says put your faith in something, there's an assumed meaning, an assumed impact, and an assumed that it will be fulfillment of a desire that you have. I will add that there's a fourth class, and that is people who walk on a plane who are absolutely oblivious to their circumstances.
Sure.
And we'll just, people who walk across the street with a cell phone in their hand, right? So I really like the analogy at the point, but I think it applies to anything.
Sure, absolutely.
That this will fulfill or provide comfort with regard to something, this thing in front of me, whatever it is.
Right.
So faith, when I think of faith and think about everything we're talking about, I think that fear is another word that kind of plays well with faith.
Fading out, Doug.
Right? And can you hear me, or?
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah,
You're just quiet.
So anyways, I see fear and faith being together in a lot of things, right? So like you're saying about flying and that fear, you have to kind of trust. Faith, is strong there. And I also see that faith is, there's degrees of faith. Like you guys are saying, right? It could be just faith that something solid, that, faith that a friend's going to come through, you know what I mean? But then there's faith that's more serious. And that faith your life can depend on that faith, right?
Sure.
And trusting in things, right? And then that's where that fear, again, the fear of the Lord, I see faith being really strong in that. When we read that, fear the Lord, you know what I mean? The fear of the Lord. We use that faith to trust in the Lord, and our walk is completely dependent upon that faith, I believe, at least me. Anyways.
Yeah, no, thank you, Doug. So let me just read real quick. I just pulled it up on dictionary.com, some of the definitions of faith. And again, I just want to point out that these are valid definitions of faith. This is how we can use the word. It's just, we want to make sure that when we're talking, that we're all using it in the same manner, because we could potentially be using different definitions and think we're saying the same thing and we're not. So, but let me just read real quick. The first definition is confidence or trust in a person or thing. Belief that is not based on proof. That's the second definition. Third definition is belief in God or the doctrines or teachings of religion. The fourth is belief in anything as a code of ethics. 5, a system of religious belief. 6, an obligation of loyalty or fidelity to a person or a promise. 7, the observance of that obligation, fidelity to one's promise or oath. And 8, definition is Christian theology. And then I'm just going to throw one else in there that I've heard, which is faith can often also be used interchangeably with hope. It's just, I have faith that this will happen.
Can I ask
Or,
what
I
dictionary
don't
that
think
is?
I just went online and went to dictionary.com.
Oh, Lord.
I'm not saying it's the best dictionary, but these are different ways that people use this word. And so I just want to make sure we understand that. And I think we're going to get there in a little bit, but I think one of the main problems that I've run into when talking about faith is I see people defining faith as the second one, which is belief that is not based on proof. Whereas when I'm talking about faith, I'm using definition 1, which is confidence or trust in a person. And so this is one of those things where people can say that I have faith in a derogatory sense, and I'm saying I have faith in this great thing, and it's not derogatory at all. It's great. And so we can talk past each other in this particular instance. So I just want to make sure, as I've said multiple times now, that we're all on the same page. So as we move forward, at least when I say faith, I'm just want to make sure I'm saying it in the definition of the first one, which is confidence or trust in a person or thing, which means that I actually don't like to use the word faith too often. I often will use the word trust more than faith, just because I want it to be more clear. What I'm saying is I put my trust in God, and I'm pretty sure that that's when, and Hezekiah and in chapter 10, when the Bible says the just shall live by faith, I'm pretty sure it's talking about the just shall live by their confidence and trust in God.
Yeah.
So
So
go ahead.
you brought up in the mix of those, it was basically it's a buckshot, right? But there's a few things in there that really stick, and the promise is the one that hadn't used explicitly, but therein is the confidence that it will provide something to you. Now,
That's right.
in reality, though, is the promise necessary? And that might, I mean, truly, do we have faith that because God has made promises to us, or do we simply believe and trust in God? I do think the promise, it's arguable whether that's part of faith or not, but you could say, oh, I have faith in his promises, which is an additional faith. And I have faith in Jesus. I have faith in his promises, are two different pieces,
Maybe.
but they're not both necessary, in my opinion, per se, in terms of defining faith. They're two objects.
But I suppose if you separate the two, what would you believe about Jesus? I'm just thinking through a question.
I agree in that the promise becomes some nebulous thing if you don't say I don't really I trust in God, whatever, and that whatever is what I trust in. I agree that is it feels incomplete as a Christian to say that. But then you go, okay, well, the promise is, well, you know what? I don't understand the promise, but I have trust in God. So I think they're both valid. Are they equal? No, but they're valid representations of what faith is my.
I think also I would put just a slightly different spin on it and point out that when I say that I trust in God, it doesn't mean that I'm tying it down just to his promises. I'm tying it down to anything he says. If he says something, I'm going to trust it because I have found him to be trustworthy, and I'm going to trust what he says. So it could be things about the past. It could be things about the present. It could be other things as well. It's not tied specifically to a promise. All right.
Agreed.
So let's dig in now on the first verse. I hope that wasn't too long of an introduction. It's still interesting, but I think we're on the same page. So let's look at this first verse now. It says, "Now faith is the substance of things hoped for." And I just want to stop right here. It's the substance of things hoped for. What do you think it means, the substance? What is this substance that we're talking about?
Yeah, my version says the assurance.
The assurance. Okay. And what do you think that means, the assurance? Is this, are we going to go back to what Eric was talking about? Is this the promise?
I like what Dan said is the foundation.
Foundation.
I
Yeah.
really like that because we have to start somewhere. We have to start with something. And so faith in God, which is what's hoped for, is what's going to come. And that's the foundation of what I believe or what my faith is.
Yeah.
And if I
Okay.
go back 40, 50 years, I don't remember when I studied Aristotle, but substance was given to material things as well as to concepts.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
may be an aspect of this in here,
Yeah.
that the essence or substance or, okay, and then you physicalize it to a rock or something, foundation. But
I would.
I mean,
Go ahead.
it is something.
Yeah.
It's not an action. It has meaning unto itself. That's all I'm expressing.
Yeah, I like that. I think if I were to pick a different word, I would say reality. It's the reality of things. That's kind of how I view it. But this is all good.
But faith is, again, you could have faith in a false thing, as was mentioned earlier. So
Yeah. And so that's
okay.
the reality.
But reality and substance, by the way, are joined concepts in Aristotle.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I'm glad we're on the same page. I'll have to read Aristotle.
You knocked that out this afternoon, John.
I'm back on the list. Yeah.
So yeah, I like this. And I like this because sometimes we get in this chronological aspect of faith. There's the faith that I have of some future thing, and I like kind of the way this is brought up. It's the substance, it's the reality of that thing. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be chronological. It can be. And the cool thing about all of this is God himself is not chronological, right? He doesn't have a beginning, he doesn't have an end. There's not a middle to God. There's none of this idea. So and that's one of the interesting aspects of God giving us promises, is when he gives us the promise, he can actually see the fulfillment of that. He can see the reality of all of that's going to happen. And so that's one of these aspects where we can trust in his promises, because it's not an empty promise. It's a promise of, hey, I've seen the outcome and this is what's going to happen, type of thing. And so I like that this is the substance of things hoped for. And again, this is, I like all of this. And one other aspect that I want to point out here is that God himself is the one who defines reality. And so putting our trust in the one who actually defines reality, there's an incredibly powerful thing here, that we can put our trust in someone who says, this is what's going to be real, and he can just speak it into existence if he desired, right? That's how powerful our God is. And so I love this whole concept here of how God is the one, he's the author of the substance. And so we can put our trust in him, because that's the substance of what we hope for. So let's see. Yeah, let's move on to the next one.
Well, no.
So the next, okay, then.
But you go back to it. Conviction of things not seen. I'm NASB.
Okay.
I think I have the other one in front of me too. So,
oh no, we were gonna talk about that.
Oh,
one
that's
next.
what you meant by next one. Okay, sorry.
Yes. Yes. And so this first part of this verse, it's the substance of things hoped for, and the second part, my translation says, the evidence for things not seen. And so I just wanted to bring this up. Now, in my notes, I actually had this analogy of the airplane, but we kind of talked about that already. But I just want to bring up, it's interesting because we all understand to some degree that airplanes can fly, right? We all understand that it is possible for them to fly. Some of us may have different understandings of it, where we actually understand what lift is and how there's thrust to get you moving forward and all of these other concepts. So that is some evidence for flying. We can also look at the fact that, hey, if you want to know, is it possible to fly? We could go talk to somebody, right? There's witnesses. We can talk to people who have flown in airplanes, and we can say, hey, there's other evidence for flying, which is, I just talked to this person. They went on a plane trip. They were fine. Everything was okay. So there's that aspect of evidence. There is the evidence when, again, we're just talking about flying. You could actually look at the safety records of flying and see and compare them to other modes of transportation and say, hey, flying might be safer than these other things. And the amazing thing is, you can have all of this evidence and people still won't have faith in flying, right? You can have all of this evidence and people aren't going to do it. And then on top of that, people might not think about it at all, as Eric was mentioning. They might have not looked at any of the evidence and they're just going to do it anyways. And so it's just interesting to me that we have this. And so that's this important part that we want to mention here, is that what the author is saying here is faith is the evidence of things not seen. It is the evidence of God in these other ways that maybe you can't see them, but there is, or maybe you can't see who God is, but you can still look at the evidence which suggests there is a God. And there is a lot of this type of evidence. Now, us being who we are and being, feeling we can be judge, jury, and executioner, we can just throw out any evidence we want at any time. And a lot of people will do that. You can show them evidence, they'll be like, no, I'm just going to discount that. But go ahead.
No, please, go ahead. Sorry.
But the point here is that there is evidence, and I think this is important, because one of the definitions of faith is believing something without proof. And that is contrary to what the author of Hebrews is pointing out. He is not saying you should just believe in anything just because you should. And this is an important concept, because this is not where God wants any of us. If we will just believe something without proof, we can believe anything. We can start following Joseph Smith or go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so maybe I think that actually I don't quite think that's what he's saying. I think faith is the evidence.
Okay.
I mean, it's a different translation than mine, but I get the use, and I think we'd have to go, oh, what does evidence mean? That which reveals to you something.
Sure.
And in reality, we could have zero evidence. In fact, I came to believe with zero evidence, in my opinion. If I were to say it's one or the other, there's obviously shades in between, but no, and people ask, why do you believe, or why do you believe in the Bible? And there's all sorts of answers for that. But in reality, what it comes down to me to me, the proof was unseen. The proof is something that I can't prove. The proof was what the gift that the Holy Spirit gave to me to come to believe in something. It is the strongest evidence I will ever have in my belief and trust and faith. Sorry, I just went circular on you. But I think he's saying it is evidence in that translation. That you don't. Evidence is something else. The evidence is being used poetically almost here, or stretching the meaning of the term. That's all. It's just an opinion. It's just my reading of how I see this verse coming together. or this chapter.
So I don't think you're wrong, but I think that these are tied together. So let me just push back a little
Let me,
bit.
just,
All right, go ahead, Sean.
in John, chapter 20, verse 29, Jesus is talking to Thomas, who said before, look at, I need to see his hands and his side and all those things in order to believe. And we don't see that. We don't see we didn't physically look at Jesus after he rose from the dead. We didn't see that. And he says in 29, he says, it's great that you believe because you see this, but there will be people who haven't seen this that will believe. And I kind of disagree that when I got saved, there was a change in my life that happened. And that change was evidence for me that I changed. And that was through the Holy Spirit coming within me and my belief in Jesus Christ. And that was my evidence for me.
Yeah.
So I
was a different person. And
I
so,
don't disagree. Yeah, sorry.
no, and sorry to keep cutting you off, but
You're not cutting me off.
I truly believe that there is evidence, because now as being a missionary, my faith has grown because I've seen how God's provided those promises that he has given us. I mean, when you pray for something and the next day it shows up in the weirdest way that you could even imagine, that just grows that faith. And that's the evidence that I see. It's unseen, because why did this guy all of a sudden decide to donate paint or just something weird? Just my faith has grown in that sense, but it's unseen because I didn't see anybody talking to this guy or any of that stuff. It's just we prayed and there it was.
So I absolutely agree. It's I'm reading in the context of this verse that we're using the English language or Greek or Latin, whatever.
Yeah.
I actually will use the word poetry because it's using a term that's usually associated with something else and putting into this meaning of faith.
Yeah.
And that he's saying, look, by the way, a ninth definition, according to Google, of the times is evidence. But a definition of evidence is faith, if you know what I mean. So what I'm not questioning the existence of evidence, the importance of evidence, and the usefulness of evidence in building our faith and even conveying it to others. It's just here, faith is an example of evidence. It's maybe another way of expressing it.
And so this is where I think that we actually are all on the same page with this, Eric, is that you are right. When we talk about faith, you may be thinking of that very, very first time you decided to put your trust in God. Okay. But if you look at it now, I don't know, how long have you been a Christian now, Eric?
10 years.
10
9
years.
and a half.
Okay. If you have gone
and 4 hours.
13 seconds. Yeah. If you had been following Jesus for 10 years, you put your trust in him and he did not prove himself to be trustworthy for 10 years, you would not be trusting in him, or it would be difficult for you to continue to put your trust in him. And the reality is that you put your trust in him and he's shown himself to be trustworthy. And so you use that as evidence of past things. So as future things come along, you can look in your past and say, God did this. I know he can take care of this other situation that I'm in. And so here's this sense where the faith itself is the evidence. You put your trust in him, and because he proved to be trustworthy, that in itself is more evidence that you can continue to put your trust in him. So I think we're on the same page.
We are.
And I never actually specifically said what the evidence is that we're talking about. There is other external evidence, but one important piece of that is he's proven himself to us individually that he is trustworthy and he can do what he said he's going to do.
You're
Okay,
So I think it's all there. Go
I'll
ahead,
just
John.
make one quick one.
Oh,
It's just,
sorry.
I just don't think he's talking about evidence here.
your
So-
your airplane thing and John Madden has been sticking with me quite a bit. Because I was just thinking, yeah, it's great if all you're doing is driving places, but if the game was in Hawaii, Madden would have to either get on a boat or get on a plane, right? And I started thinking about Jesus being the only way. And regardless of where you want to go or how you think you could get there, there's only one way to really get there, and that's through Jesus.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about Jesus in the plane and Madden, and yeah, I don't care how, I think just us as people, we always try to find other ways to get into heaven, so to speak, right? And yeah, there's only one way. So whether you like flying or not, you better get on that plane, man.
Yeah. And some people are just completely unwilling to do it. I think it is interesting that one of the biggest fears people have is of death. And they will do anything to stay alive just a little bit longer. They'll change the way they eat. They'll change the way they do things. They'll change all sorts of things, but they will not put their trust in Jesus, who said, "Hey, I'll resurrect you and you can live forever." And so that is interesting to me that people are willing to do anything to live longer, except put their trust in Jesus. So I just this is all interesting, and I just want actually, I think Eddie has something he wants to say, so I'll let Eddie speak, and then we'll move on.
Look, like I do not want to talk about the airplane thing, but it just you guys talk about it again, and then it's because it's a particular timing. You know, Boeing just admitted criminal charge, and there's a mountain of evidence that they actually have the software bug, and then they need to repay 500 million to the people, and 400 people actually die because of their because of their faith on the airplane, which the evidence so is not good.
That's true.
Yeah, so I think you use the example like pretty casually, but like this particular read is an interesting read that you use this example because Boeing admitted criminal charge, and 400 people die because of that.
As I was thinking of that, I would take it even further back. Let's talk about the Wright brothers, right? Before airplanes came into play. And now you're backing up to, and that's where I think the key of this somewhat is, I kept thinking of this. I was like, the airplane is just the manifestation of a physical reality of the law of aerodynamics overcoming the law of gravity. Now, most of us are not going to be able to calculate that on a piece of paper on the fly and speak to that. Maybe some of you can, I have no idea. But there's a principle behind, and that's where the unseen thing is. The airplane is seen. We trust in the airplane, but really what's going on is there's a reality that had to be discovered. The Wright brothers in this case. I don't know exactly how they did. I never read their story, but there's a way in which aerodynamics overcomes gravity. And I wonder, in that sense, God has put forth the things of the laws of the universe in which we don't fully understand reality the way he understands reality. And the best manifestation of that, of course, is Jesus himself telling you, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Now, that's an all-encompassing statement that goes way beyond what we can see, understand. We understand some parts of truth, some parts of life, some parts of the way. And we're constantly learning in that sense. But what we're also saying is there's a faith in the one who's put these principles into place. And that's why those things are unseen. Because we get some sense of it, but we don't fully grok or understand that whole thing. So we have to put our faith, and that faith is evidence, I think, that we've trusted in someone in this case who's proclaiming a reality that's beyond what we can see, but yet we're willing to trust them for the things that are yet unseen and the things that are yet unknown. And that's sort of, that's kind of where the airplane principle sort of falls short. But if you take it back to the Wright brothers,
Sure.
in that sense, maybe that's where our faith is more similar, because no one has yet to prove it. I mean, well, we have a couple thousand years of history now with Jesus, but going back, a little bit longer, I don't know if that helps.
No, I think that, and I do want to add to it because you bridged something here, and I think faith is inherent in the scientific method, which is, I think, what you've described here.
Yeah.
And atheist scientists don't understand how much they depend on faith. I mean, it drives them. It drives every step of the process. So I will reconsider the aspect of this being about evidence. However, I think I'm reading another translation, and it doesn't use the word evidence, and I think it's throwing us off a little bit.
Sure.
It's I think actually gets closer to foundation, which is where it all started.
Should we use the example of Noah?
No. We're good. That's like verse 5. Verse 6. Let's hold on.
Sorry, but thank you for the indulgence, John.
Okay, so
I mean, that's a perfect example of
faith
something
is,
that he had never experienced before is going to happen, and he had the belief and a strong belief in, yeah.
okay, so faith in Jesus Christ is like faith in an airplane. Is that it?
Well, there is an aspect of it that I think that is important we should understand, which is the amount of faith that we have does not actually impact the reality at all, right? So if you have no faith in an airplane, that does not mean the airplane is going to crash or it's going to fly. If you have a little bit of faith in the airplane, it doesn't mean that the airplane is going to fly or it's going to crash. If you have a lot of faith in the airplane, it doesn't mean it's going to fly or crash. It doesn't actually impact the ability or the reality of the airplane. And for us, it's the same way. We can have a little bit of faith in God. We can put our trust in Him and really struggle and really, have a hard time, but still put our trust in Him, and He is faithful. You can have a lot of faith in God and put your trust in Him and completely depend on Him, and He is faithful. Or conversely, you cannot put your trust in God at all, reject Jesus entirely, and still God is faithful, and Jesus is still trying to get your attention. And there's an important aspect here, is the amount of faith that we have does not affect God's ability to do what He's trying to do. And so that was one of the points that I wanted to bring up with the airplane, which is we talked about how there's different levels of faith, but really the only ones that matter is, are you going to put your faith in Him, or are you not going to put your faith in Him? Now, if you put more faith in Him, you will see more evidence, and you will have, God will be faithful, and you're going to see, wow, God is really faithful in a different way than if you just barely put your faith in Him. And God will reward our trust in Him. But at the same time, if you put your trust in Him, you're saved, right? So there's this. I remember just one more aspect of the evidence thing, and I understand where you're going, or what your point is, but I just want to bring up this other point, which is, if you look at the definition of faith, one of them is believing without proof. And I don't think that that's what God is calling us to do. And I think this is kind of addressing that in that sense, that it's not evidence without proof. I knew this guy, and he was like, I know about this Christian thing. I know about this Jesus. I'm just not sure. And finally, he's like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go all in for 1 year. I'm just going to go follow after Him, seek after Him, and then see what happens. And so he goes in, and what happens? That's all he had to do. He just had to put a little bit of trust in Him, start following after Jesus, and then he realizes, oh, Jesus is really Lord. He really is God. And now he's a pastor at a church over in Manteca. So it just went from just a little bit of, okay, I don't know, but I'm going to try it out, to, okay, this is totally real, because Jesus is real, right? He really is Lord. He really is King. He really can do the things that He said He can do. And so we are out of time to jump into some of this other stuff because I want to also hit verse 2 and talk about the elders by a good testimony, which I think kind of goes along with what we're talking about with this idea that we can see these things. And one of the questions that I had here was, what are some evidence or what are some things that has influenced you into trusting God? And I think a big one is just the fact that we trust him and then he shows he's trustworthy. But unfortunately, we're out of time. So I don't know if we'll hit that next week or not. But uh, any last thoughts before we kind of wrap this up? I know I just kind of just jumped out there.
Well, I'd like to add this one verse in, John. It's Romans 8:24. And it ties in with what we're saying, but it uses different words. And it says, "For we are saved by hope. But hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, doth he yet hope for? But if we hope for what we see not, then do we with patience wait for it." Just
Okay.
throw it out. It's another way of saying it. Hope and faith.
I really like the discussion. I'm sorry if others didn't. But I like what crept in here was the incremental aspect. I think, John, that you were introducing, forgive me if others did too, but we all our knowledge, all our development is based on something we already have behind us, our experience. And we move on that. If we have a lot of experience, we have a trajectory to find. If we have little, we have to take more faith jumps because we're learning. It's different ways of putting it, but everything we think and do is based, frankly, I mean, even, let's say physically is based on what we've experienced, and that expresses some of this idea, but we have to move forward. We have to step out.
Yeah.
And that stepping out is an aspect of our existence that requires faith of some kind. So
yeah. And when you say it requires faith, you mean it requires some trust, right? You have to just be like, okay,
it's
I
human
trust that
nature,
this is going to happen.
And I think we're mixing Christian faith with faith as a general concept, and that's where we will get confused, because I think faith, I look at faith more like money. Sorry, it's inner, it's something, but then there's Christian faith, which defines it explicitly. So for us, but you can put faith in anything, and it's misplaced. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. We have time for one last thought if somebody wants to, or we can close. All right. Mark, are you up for praying for us?